Hi, everyone, and thank you for joining us here today. My name is Lauren Lake. I'm the co-founder and COO of Bridget. We are a construction software company. We're a female-founded business, and we build workforce intelligence products for the construction world. And today we're here to talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion in the construction industry. This is a big topic. We've been hearing more and more discussion around what companies can do to build a diverse and inclusive environment and workplace. And I'm joined today by Lora McMillan. She is a construction professional, has lots of experience in the construction world, and speaks quite a bit about diversity and the things that she's done in her own workplace to build a diverse and inclusive environment. So just wanted to have a discussion with Lora and talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, and some things that we can all learn and approach differently in our own working environments. So thank you, Lora, for joining us. Do you want to give just a quick brief on your history in the construction world and why you're so passionate about DE&I?
Yeah, thanks, Lauren. Appreciate you having me on today. And yeah, my name is Lora McMillan, and my pronouns are she, her. I've been in the construction industry for about 15 years now. I started in residential construction, building homes, and moved into the commercial world of building giant buildings and skyscrapers in Toronto. So I have kind of mixed bag experience as far as some in design and some in the actual construction, but my passion is in the construction on a site office or on a field. But of course, with that and being a woman and identifying as queer comes kind of this otherness that's created in the field that you become acutely aware of quite quickly. And it's not necessarily always with any type of discrimination, but it can be just not seeing anyone that's like you in those spaces, not seeing anyone above you in those spaces. So just kind of being aware of what makes you different than kind of the status quo, which I'm not sure if you're aware, but construction does have kind of an issue with representation.
Definitely. And let's dig into that a little bit, because I think it's interesting, this idea of feeling different, not seeing people that look like you or that you identify with in either leadership positions or in your peer group within the working environment. Do you want to talk to us a little bit about what has your experience been with that? You show up on site, do you feel different right from kind of your first moment walking onto the job site, or maybe just give us a little bit of the perspective of being in your shoes day in and day out and what that's like?
Yeah, and I think it's kind of cemented in everything we do. But also, I started from schooling in interior design, where I was with predominantly women. And then going into construction, a course at George Brown where it was predominantly men, and just kind of seeing the differences in those spaces. And I started working construction, which also had predominantly men, but I did end up working for a company that was run and owned by women. And to see that kind of difference right off the bat was like, I didn't think I knew that I was different necessarily, but then you do kind of start making those comparisons. And unfortunately, in the commercial construction industry, there are very low representation of women in the industry, but also on site. So as my career progressed, I've maintained site presence, but with that has kind of come low representation. So I think, the industry is around 10%, but on site is maybe, around 2%. So just kind of not recognizing anyone around you, or just kind of not recognizing similarities and being kind of typecasted in a way as well. It's funny, starting in construction, I felt I had to kind of be tough and maybe throw around a couple swear words to get along with the guys. But it soon became even a benefit, to be honest with you. I found being a woman, being a little bit better at communication, or being a little bit more communicative, made me kind of step apart from a lot of the people I was working with, and that is helpful. But at the same time, there's a lot of systemic issues you don't necessarily are aware of until you get your first set of boots and your first hard hat and vest, and you're swimming in your own gear, and then potentially this thing, this thought group where you may eventually get pregnant, and that could slow down your career path. And also just having kind of different needs within the industry, and just seeing how kind of that's not represented there. And of course, there's the nomenclature that I just find something that's super clear. You hear the words like foreman and manpower, and you're kind of shown at every corner that you are not thought of here, or you're not represented. And that kind of becomes not a stopping point, but potentially a little bit alienating for women and queer folks in the industry, I think.
Definitely. I know you've spoken out about kind of doing away with some of those terms, those gendered terms like manpower planning, man hours, man door, and so on. And ever since you brought that up to me, I feel like I've been hearing those terms everywhere. So it is interesting just how ingrained that is. And it's such an easy change to make, or at least to be conscious of. I still slip up every now and then, but I'm at least aware and trying to correct some of those terms that have just become second nature to a lot of us. So one thing that comes up in a lot of the conversations we have, especially with executives at large scale general contracting companies, is the labor shortage that the industry is seeing right now. And I think this is interesting. Companies are competing for top talent left, right, and center. And I think there's an angle there where building a more inclusive and diverse workforce will help with the labor shortage. Do you have any thoughts on that? How can companies use diversity in order to build their talent pool and kind of attract outside talent?
Yeah, and I think when we talk about the nomenclature, we kind of don't recognize that at first as really a big issue, but then you kind of realize it's part of what excludes you from construction. And then, I didn't really understand, DEI or diversity, equity, inclusion until I thought about it as a sense of belonging. And then I realized that was, kind of what was missing for me is feeling like I belong, because everywhere I turned, I kind of felt like I didn't belong. But when you look at it as a sense of belonging, and you start thinking about inclusion, it's like, how can you be included in this conversation? How can you be included in this industry? And it's no secret, there's 500,000 workers that will be retiring within the next 10 years. So that's a lot of positions to fill. And I think, around construction, as we're getting a little bit more technically savvy, and, sustainability towards energy, and just being a little bit more aware of our surroundings, we're starting to see different voices make innovative companies. And what I've seen in the industry is that as soon as we start recognizing that, say, a woman can bring something different to the table, or potentially a racialized person may have different lived experiences that could help, contribute to a new idea or a new way of doing things, it's like a light bulb goes off in everybody's head. And I think, the word DEI sometimes can be a little bit alienating, but when you start talking about what it is, nuts and bolts, it's getting different people in a room creating solutions that you've never heard of, and then everybody's like, yeah, that's what I want. So I think when you start looking outside of your status quo of people that you may be hiring just based on biases that you didn't even know you had because they look like you or they sound like you or you came from the same background, then you realize we got to go outside our industry. We got to go to the military who have great leaders, or we need to go to different industries that can bring something different to construction. And I think there's no secret that the construction industry has really not gotten more efficient. We've kind of just we maintain status quo. There's now this kind of like aha moment of we need to try something different, and that's different people.
Yeah, it's very similar to some of the things that we faced early on in starting our business, because we're in the tech world. There is a shortage of people in the tech world right now. It's a booming industry, and it's not a very diverse workforce. And so early on, as an early stage company, we were always looking to outside industries to say, okay, we need someone to join our company in a customer support role. What are some of the other industries where people might have similar skill sets that they could bring over into the tech world, even if they don't have that specific background? And so, industries like hospitality, people that have worked in service before, had all of those skill sets, and we were able to bring them into the tech environment and actually expand the labor pool versus just pulling from that same kind of homogeneous group. So I think a lot of the same ideas apply. Have you seen any problems with attracting and retaining or retaining diverse talent in the industry? Do you think it's like, is it as easy as just attracting those people into the industry? Or do you see that there is more attrition from some of those folks from minority groups?
I mean, I think there's like two sides of it. It's like diversity is having different voices in the room, right? And there's, I like to think of acquired diversity as, something that you got, whether it was through schooling or where you lived. But then there's inherent diversity, which is like who you are as a person. So, sexual orientation, gender identity, socioeconomic status, those things make you look at things differently. So if you look at it both ways, you want to have both, acquired diversity and inherent diversity, but you don't see the change until you get inclusion, where diverse folks have, a seat at the table and have a voice to make decisions, power, and, access to power. So I think it's one thing to hire a bunch of diverse folks. I think that's fairly easy. Like you said, maybe going outside different markets, because obviously the construction industry is not represented. But I think it's a little bit more complicated that when you get to retaining those employees. And that's where we have to start making systemic changes, like changing the nomenclature, just so you're not looking at all these terrible words that make you feel like you're not, represented or belonging, and even just, hiring other diverse folks and having teams that are diverse. So you're not the other in the room. And I can tell you how many times that happens, where you're like, yeah, I'm definitely the person out here, right? And that can be a little bit alienating. So I think there's like the initial, just let's hire different people, but there's going to be a full systemic overhaul that's required to ensure that we're keeping people, and that goes for the promotions and pay raises and pay gaps, and it's a lot deeper than just hiring different folks.
No, that makes sense. In terms of building that, I guess, inclusive environment, what role do you think workplace culture plays in that? Or how have you thought, as a leader in the construction world, how are you thinking about inclusivity and building that culture of belonging? Are there any specific things that you've done or things that you've found have helped to build that type of environment, or any thoughts on culture and how you actually achieve that sense of belonging for people?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, it's a long journey. So I think there's no necessary action item that's going to lead to, everybody feeling included. But I think there is a lot of value to, kind of getting diverse folks' opinion on the matter, and just being like, hey, how would you feel? How would you be better? And I mean, I'd like to kind of lean on the fact that the construction industry, we had a very poor safety culture back in the 80s, where people were dying and being injured, and this was commonplace. And then you put in checks and balances to kind of equal those out, and all of a sudden safety is number one, and the safety culture is, in commercial, safety or nothing. And I think what we can see is kind of marrying those two. Safety culture is also safety of feeling like you belong and feeling like you can be yourself, and free from discrimination. So I think the cultural shift is just, I think of it two ways. I think it needs to be from the top down. I think leadership needs to be like, who's being quiet in this room, and how can I call on them and find out their opinions and see if they have anything, or who's somebody different that I haven't asked before, who's the opposite of me, just to get that proper feedback. All leadership needs good feedback. But I also think it comes from the bottom up, and where folks need to ask for what they want. I think, especially as a woman in a male-dominated career, you tend to kind of step back and be a little bit nervous to stick out. But I've had a lot of success with managers and coworkers by just asking, I want to lead this. I want to pick at this, right? And kind of advocating for ourselves. Another thing is mentoring and networking. There's mentorship, there's coaching, and then there's sponsorship. And I find those three things are critical. So you need to work your way up there. And when you get up there, you need to mentor folks that are below you to make sure you can bring them up with you. And sponsorship, provide opportunities for people at every, if you're the center of attention at all times, that's a perfect opportunity for you to give someone else, a bit of time. And that's the basis of inclusion.
Yeah, I remember talking to you a little while back, and you alluded to the same idea earlier on in our conversation around, we were talking about showing up at the job site, you put on your PPE, your safety vest is massive, your boots don't fit. You are swimming in your gear. Then you walk through the man door and you walk into a meeting where you're going to talk about manpower planning. And you kind of walked me through what that first 20 minutes, let's say, on the job feels like, and just how many messages you're being hit with constantly that you don't fit in. And I feel like that was really eye-opening to me, as someone who's not, on site day in and day out, as you would be. I think that really helped just share that perspective. And I think it's interesting when you talk to some of the leaders in the construction world who are predominantly men. I don't know if I think everyone has good intentions to, people know that this is a topic that people should be discussing. They're bringing up at board meetings. I think people are doing the right things, but I think that was just a really eye-opening way for me to think about it when you actually walked me through what those kind of first moments on site feel like. And I think that's probably something that some of those executives at the top probably aren't necessarily thinking about all the time.
Well, you know what, it's funny because especially with everybody just being a little bit more aware that other folks struggle with different things that we don't. Obviously racial tensions are coming up and Indigenous rights are being talked about. And, finally, and that's kind of things that we didn't know, but you don't know what you don't know. And I think, there's lots of conversations in the DEI space about privilege. And I think the way that privilege is worded sometimes can be a little bit hard to understand. You think of privilege as a set of advantages that you've experienced, but we try to kind of look at it in a different way. Privilege is just your baseline, and everything else is kind of barriers that have been put in other people's ways. So marginalized folks are not, are not saying that predominantly, white male folks are having an easy route. It's just that there's barriers that you're not aware of. So the beauty of the DEI journey is once you start being aware of things, it's an aha moment. And of course, nobody wants anyone to struggle. No one ever hears, geez, I never knew you felt like a 14-year-old, take your son to work day. And once you bring it up and you're like, hey, this is an issue, people are flocking to try and remove these barriers. So it's really just a matter of you don't know what you don't know. But that's the beauty of these spaces, is creating those communities within whether women, queer folks, racialized folks, Indigenous folks, and kind of just sharing the stories and sharing the experiences. And that's what kind of opens people's eyes. And that's where you get kind of that inclusion as well. You bring different people to the table and say, what are your struggles? And a very good mentor of mine said, not everybody around this table knows everything, but someone knows something. And I think that's kind of the basis of this.
Yeah, we always talk about the idea of unknown unknowns. So just, you don't know what you don't know. In terms of having those discussions, I think we've seen, at least from my perspective, I feel like the topic of diversity, equity, and inclusion is coming up more and more, which is great to see. I think it's being talked about at the board level within the larger companies. It's being talked about within the leadership teams. Do you have any experience within your own peer groups, even of some of the discussions that are going on? Do you feel like it's something that people are more openly talking about, within the past couple of years, or what's your thinking between yourself and your peers in terms of how some of these conversations are shaping up?
Yeah, I mean, it's no secret, right, that the construction industry is kind of homogeneous, like you were saying before. But I think it's always been difficult to kind of tie that in with a business case or potentially something tangible, right? You think of DEI, you think of like feelings, but how can that be, put down to paper? But the Canadian Construction Association did a great job. They did a recent survey and a report on, diversity and inclusion and its effects in the construction industry. And it definitely said, teams with women are more efficient, and teams with, more racialized people are make more money in general. They have better results. And then there's kind of the employee retention, which is the employees are happy when they come to work. The employees leave when they come to work, and that could be simple stuff like even just increasing mental health care in your benefits, because certainly mental health issues is not new, and it's not a secret. So by providing augmented something above the base benefits package, just creates this like, oh, my employer actually cares about me and how I feel, and even parental leave, and just augmenting that for both men and women to take as much time as they need. It kind of just levels things out. So I think that's kind of the discussions that are being had. And the beauty of the DEI space is it needs both people at the top and people at the bottom. Like it needs everybody trying to kind of collaborate together, because it's not one person's responsibility, especially if those people at top don't have this experience. So how would they possibly know? So it's a collaboration, right? It doesn't have to be us against them. And I think that's kind of the beauty of it. It's like inclusion in the solution.
Yeah, I know more and more companies are creating different groups. I know there's lots of women in construction groups. There are some companies that have more of a diversity, equity, and inclusion forum, or like a leadership group that meets on a monthly basis. Have you had any experience with any types of initiatives like that? Do you think that's helpful for companies to try and start?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, employee resource groups, I feel, are the most important thing about any journey, is just to get community. Being a member of the queer community, it's almost second nature to have people to reach out to, and to go to spaces where we're similar, and just kind of be in each other's company. And I never actually thought about that from an other side, where some people don't have community. And I think building that community is so important. And I think there's some hesitation sometimes that, if you get a bunch of women in a room, they're going to be revolting and, hating against other people, hating against men. But I really think it's building that sense of community, leaning on each other, knowing that you can talk to each other, be like, hey, how did you navigate this issue? How did you, navigate that issue? And just supporting each other, right? Because if there's opportunities within those groups, just kind of flagging people and doing that sponsorship program. And then, of course, inclusion and diversity councils, or diversity and equity inclusion councils, I think are just a good check and balance, just like a safety committee, just like innovation committees. It's critical to, put this at the forefront. And I think the results are going to be felt throughout the company. You're going to see a lot of results as far as employee retention and profitability and just efficiency. It's kind of like a no-brainer, and you are seeing it pop up in the construction industry for sure.
Yeah, back before the COVID days, when my business partner and I were still traveling quite a bit, we got in the habit of hosting a women in construction lunch in whatever city we were in. We would just message a couple people, whoever we kind of knew in that city, and ask them to invite a couple people. So it'd be small groups, maybe 10 or so women would get together and we'd have lunch and just chat. And it was a great networking opportunity for us, but it was so interesting just to hear the conversations that would come up over, a 1 hour lunch, and just people sharing ideas and support. And it was just such a great thing to see. And I think, it was just that feeling of camaraderie, someone else who has been in your shoes and being able to kind of empathize with some of the challenges or share solutions. So I feel like it was such a small thing, just building that, even though it was a 1 hour event, that sense of community was felt pretty instantly, which I think was really interesting.
Yeah. And I mean, I get approached a lot, and I approach folks that I see are doing work in this space. And, I've been able to talk to different folks in different companies across the country that are just interested in this and kind of the science behind inclusion and diversity. And there's a huge network, and they represent all kinds of different people. And that's something, I endeavor to do in the future, is just to collect people and kind of create a community of like, how do we break the industry through, the struggles, while also, being helpful to the industry themselves, right? Because I mean, you can't have, diversity and inclusion without having a successful business. It needs to be hand in hand. And I think it does. So, definitely creating a larger community just in the inclusion space has been incredible. And just to see how many people are like, we need this, so it's important to a lot.
Yeah, definitely. I think my final question for you, and then we'll let you go, is I've heard more and more, and I think you said something similar, that diversity is going to be the new safety. I heard a few different CEOs saying that at an event I was at a couple of weeks back, and people talked about the same thing where, back many years ago, safety was viewed as just kind of, this is the norm. Yes, we'd like to do better, but there was kind of all these barriers along the way. And that has changed completely from an expectations, standards, policy, and so on, where now a safe work site and work environment is the absolute must. And so people are talking about diversity being kind of the next step along that journey. I know there's an inclusion week. So there's safety week every year in the construction world. There's talk of this year launching, I think in October at some point, an inclusion week, bringing that same idea to the DE&I space. Any final thoughts on that? When people say diversity is the new safety, I guess, what does that mean to you?
I mean, to me, it's like inclusion is the new safety, because without inclusion, kind of it's just a bunch of diverse folks, maybe, scattered all over the place. So you got to give some power and some access there. But yeah. I think and I mean, it ties into so many different departments because like we were talking about, like one of the biggest issues within the trades is mental health illness, and it's prominent. I mean, that's just a general population issue, but in construction with a lot of really difficult working conditions, it's an issue, and you're losing employees to this, and you're struggling to kind of get ahead of the curve here. So I think there's a lot of kind of ties to the safety as well as kind of the inclusion. But I also think innovation is the forefront of construction. And I don't think you get innovation unless you have that inclusion. So it's just a different way of looking at things. And I mean, I think in the construction industry, especially construction management, we all know there are kind of that technical savvy, aptitudes, and then there's more of a people management soft skills. And typically it's like you want the people that know how to swing steel and know how to put up a high rise in record time. But I think the true value and the true importance is working with people, because that's what we do. We just manage the people that do the work. And I think the most important part is to try and like get the best out of those people. That is more so the soft skills that need to be honed now. So we understand the technical components. Construction is not really going to change that much. So the innovation is on how do we get more out of people, and how do we kind of like make people feel like they're contributing the best and the most efficient. So I think, and that's where the tech industry kind of has a handle on that, because I feel like they've kind of understood that, the big companies have kind of switched from a more technical component to a more soft skills and focusing on that.
Yeah, I think in the tech world, there's a huge emphasis that's been put on employee engagement and making sure that you build that environment where people are going to show up and do their best work and feel like they're adding value. And I feel like the construction industry is starting to have more and more of those conversations. So I think a lot of what we have seen in the tech world when it comes to people and culture and employee engagement and empowering teams, I think that's kind of what construction is going to see over the next couple of years, which is really exciting. We're definitely thinking about that as we build out our products. Is there a way that we can leverage our technology to be part of some of that people and culture piece? Because I think, you talk to construction leaders and they always say, it's our people that win projects. It's our people that drive our profits. Yes, we can do the best technical work in all of these other areas, but if we don't have the right people engaged and showing up, wanting to do their best work, then we're not going to see the profits or the progress that we want to see. So I think that, it is all tying back to the people, and that all ties back to building that inclusive environment where you have a great group of people that are collaborating. Any final thoughts for us before we finish this off?
I mean, I think you nailed it there. A lot of the leaders and people I look up to in the industry, they always say, we're not in the business of building, we're in the business of people. And that's really where it is. And I think, gone are the days where people are throwing hard hats around and calling each other names. I think what we understand is we need to get the best out of people. And the way to do that is not necessarily holler and shout and kind of create this space. It's about creating communities, but also just making someone feel like their voice matters, their opinion matters, and they're valuable. And I think that's really, especially with the millennials coming up, guilty as charged, that's what we want, is just a sense of we're important and we're part of the picture. And I think that's what's going to help bridge that gap in the construction industry big time.
Definitely. Yes. We always talk about the idea that people show up every day wanting to do their best work, wanting to be successful, wanting to add value. And so how do you make sure that you're setting people up for success so they can feel like they are having a hand in building a business or a building or whatever it is that they're doing every day. So I think that is so important. Thank you so much for joining us today and sharing some of your thoughts. We've always looked up to your leadership in this space, and thank you so much for sharing your thoughts with us.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity. I really appreciate it. This was lovely. Anytime.
Thank you.